Back at you here on Stand to Reason, Greg Koukl, and just FYI, I mentioned, or our last caller did, from Dallas, that the talk that I gave at Watermark Church yesterday, it's actually called Two Miracles, and I talk about the miracle of the cross, the miracle that couldn't be seen, the great exchange, where Jesus took our sin and guilt and punishment, and we then get his righteousness. And this is called substitutionary atonement and justification. He made him who knew no sin to become sin on our behalf, that we might be the righteousness of God in him. That would be 2 Corinthians 5:21. And that one verse kind of captures both of those aspects of the great exchange. And then I talked about the miracle of the resurrection and talked about 4 points that virtually, that on the main, historians agree to now. And this is critical scholarship, not just Christian scholarship, but on balance, historians acknowledge the death of Jesus on a Roman cross, that he was buried, and then second, the tomb in which he was buried was found empty Sunday morning. And then the disciples had an experience that they thought was the risen Christ. And finally, that the proclamation of this experience of the risen Christ is what started the early church. So these are 4 points that the scholars on the main acknowledge to be fixed facts of history. Now, the question then becomes, what best explains those 4 facts? Maybe the disciples stole the body. That's why the tomb was empty. Maybe they had hallucinations. That's why they thought they saw Jesus. Maybe Jesus had a twin, or maybe that Jesus never died on the cross. He just swooned in the grave. These are all things that people have suggested will explain away the resurrection. So I examine those different options, and I find them wanting for what I think are obvious reasons, and conclude that the best answer to the question, why was the tomb empty and why did they say they see Jesus, is that the tomb was empty because Jesus rose from the dead. He was risen, and they were witnesses. That was their claim. All right, let's go to Andy in Atlanta, Georgia. Hello, Andy.
Hey, Greg, can you hear me all right?
I can so far.
Awesome. So last week I was listening on podcasts. I love podcasts because I can listen to them on my way back and forth to work.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you kind of touched on this with the multiple callers, but it was kind of the question about free will.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it makes sense that you choose to sin, and that God knows like what your choice is going to be, whether or not you want to be saved or not, and that God knows that you're going to sin, and these are the places that you're going to sin.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of mentioned last week that because you have a sin nature, you are pretty much like guaranteed to sin.
That's true.
And that kind of makes sense to me. But then you also talked a little bit about election and like how if you want to be chosen by God to be in his hand, and you talked about how he is giving us, our hearts and all that.
He changes our hearts, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So that makes sense to me too. But my question is does having the sin nature automatically mean sin? Because we know that Jesus became fully human, and so he had the sin nature from Adam as well, but he didn't choose to sin. So is it still a choice?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, if he could do it without sinning,
mm-hmm.
then does that mean that the sin nature automatically means that you're sinning?
Yeah. Let me go back and lay a. Oh, I don't know what that is, but it's really awful sounding. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Are we okay now, Andy?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's right. All right, so I want to go back and lay some foundation pieces in place for you.
Okay.
A real critically important part of Christian theology is that we are not born neutral. Okay. Now, when I say Christian theology, what I'm saying is this is orthodoxy, and this is one of those things like the deity of Christ that is classical Christianity, and
Mhm.
if one denies this, they're off the reservation. All right.
Yeah.
4th century guy named Pelagius argued that there was no sin nature. We are born neutral. Jesus was an example to us. We could follow his example and then not sin. It's within our capability not to do that. Now, Augustine was his opponent during this time ideologically, and Augustine is the model of orthodoxy here. Pelagius was off the reservation because the
Mhm.
scripture teaches, though Adam was, well, I couldn't say born neutral because he wasn't born, but he was made neutral. He was
Mhm.
neutral. He was capable of sinning and capable of not sinning, all right? Either way.
Mhm.
After Adam, though, and after the fall, something changed in Adam. He became broken. He was still beautiful, made in the image of God, but now he's terribly broken. And when I say Adam, I mean Adam and Eve and humankind, and they reproduce after their own kind. So now they are broken. They are reproducing broken human beings. And because they're broken, they are no longer neutral. And because they are no longer neutral, they cannot avoid sinning. So the sin nature results in us sinning without exception. Now, I'm going to say something about
Mhm.
Jesus in a moment because he is exceptional, and
Yeah.
therefore he doesn't fall under the same category. In the category of standard humans born of Adam, everybody is broken out of the womb. And therefore, eventually, when they start living out their moral lives, they are going to live out that brokenness, and they're going to accrue sin debt to themselves that they're going to have to answer to God for. So
Mhm.
Pelagius was wrong. Augustine was right. Human beings are born sinners. That's why they sin. Another way to
Mhm.
put it is they're not sinners because they sin. They sin because they're sinners. All right. So now, gee, some people say, well, that's not fair. Well, I don't know if it's fair or not, but that's the way it is. This
Mhm.
is the very straightforward teaching of the scripture, which means we are all enslaved.
Mhm.
We are enslaved to sin. We're enslaved, and Jesus talks about that in John 8. We are enslaved to Satan. Paul talks about that in 2 Corinthians 4. John talks about it in 1 John 5. We are held captive by Satan to do his will. The whole world is in the power of the evil one. I mean, that's ugly stuff. And
Mhm.
so, therefore, we must be rescued. And so, who rescues us? The one who rescues us is somebody who is not a slave.
Mhm.
And that is Jesus of Nazareth. Now, the reason that Jesus wasn't a slave is because he had no sin nature. I should say that's the reason. But part of the fact that he was not a slave entailed the notion that he did not have a sin nature.
Can
Was
I
he?
ask a question
Yeah,
real fast?
let me finish the statement, though, because I
Okay.
might cover this. Jesus was 100% human, which means that everything that is a necessary quality of being human was true of Jesus. Being fallen is not a necessary part of being human because Adam wasn't fallen, though he was fully human, until he sinned. Being fallen is what is called an accidental property of being human. All humans now have that accidental property except for Jesus. And but Jesus could be fully human without being fallen. Okay, your question.
Okay. So if Jesus doesn't have the potential to sin, because, well, I guess, does Jesus have the potential to
Well,
sin
see,
without the sin nature?
that is a very good question. This is something, and it's a perceptive question because theologians have knocked this one around for a while, and so different people inside inside Christianity are going to answer that differently. Everybody
Mhm.
agrees Jesus did not sin. That is everybody that's on the reservation. All right.
Yeah.
Now, whether he had the potential to be able to sin or not is an open question. My answer: it is not possible. It was not possible for Jesus to sin. And the reason I say that is Jesus was one person with two natures, a divine nature and a human nature. And his divine nature cannot be isolated from his human nature because it's ingrained in the one person of Jesus. We can talk about it as being separate from his human nature, but that's just, a de dicto difference. That is a difference in the way we talk about it. With regards to his being, I think they call it de re, I don't know. There aren't two parts of him. They're integrated. So it isn't like his human nature could sin without his divine nature sinning. Since his divine nature could not sin, then Jesus could not sin because it's impossible for God to sin. That's my line of thinking. Other people go in a different direction with it, and they're welcome to that. That's just the way I see it. In a certain sense, I guess you could say, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say that. I would say no, he didn't have the potential to because I don't think it was possible for him to sin.
Okay.
Others would say yes to that.
And then the last thing, going back to the election, was I've heard you talk about the problem of evil before, and I've heard J. Warner Wallace talk about the problem of evil recently. And one of the things that they say is that if you want to have true love, which God wants us to have, then he has to give us freedom to choose him or not to choose him.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
Okay.
Partly because I'm glad you raised this. I don't know what Jim's view is, but Jay Warner's view is, but so I'm not trying to take exception with him, but just let me respond to the issue. This is a common refrain among Christians. So a lot of people believe this, and people I respect. Okay, but I just are you married?
No, I'm
okay. You have a girlfriend?
Unfortunately not.
Oh, okay. Well, then I can't use you as an example. I want people who are married and have children to think of their children for a moment and ask themselves a couple of questions. First question, do you love your kids? I think they're going to say yes, okay? Here's the second question, and I just want those of you listening to think about this before you jump in. Think about the actuality of it. Did you choose to love your kids? Now, I don't mean, are there times when you say, man, I'm really fed up with this kid, but I'm going to choose to be loving towards them? I mean, we all have to do that at some point. I'm saying when you saw your baby the first time, there that little red blob of flesh is making a lot of noise and excreting odd things, and your heart bubbles over. Are you exercising your will at that moment? And since then, for guys, maybe this happens a little bit later, when kids get more interesting, I don't know. But since then, and I think if a person were honest, he would say, no, I'm not exercising my will. Well, wait a minute. Do you love your kids? Of course I love my kids. But your love is not an exercise of your will. Well, no, it just kind of happens. Well, then love is not a function of your will. You don't love out of your free will. Something else is going on there. Think about people falling in love. I mean, we even use the term fall in love. We don't say, I decide to love. There are times when we do make decisions to be loving. I acknowledge that. But just think, most people who get married, at least in Western cultures, are drawn into a relationship not because they're making a decision to love, but because love is happening in them. It just begins to happen, just like with your kids. And in fact, this becomes almost, well, in some people's mind, though I don't agree with this, it becomes a justification for illicit relationships. They'll say, well, listen, I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even want this. It just happened. I fell in love. Okay? So all of this is simply is evidence underscoring the idea that I don't think that love is something we choose. So if love isn't something we're choosing freely, then it isn't that God wants us to love him freely. Like, okay, I'm just going to choose to love God. And in fact, I don't even think new Christians do choose to love God. I became a Christian in 1973. When I became a Christian, was I loving God? Was I, okay, Jesus, I'm going to choose to love you? No, I became a Christian because I needed forgiveness. I responded to the offer of the gospel. The love that I have in my heart for God is something God nurtured over time and growing with him. This is, I never thought of it like this before, Andy, this particular point. But I'm wondering, for all of those people who became Christians as adults, for them to reflect back on the day or the moment, the time when they became Christian, did they find themselves falling in love with Jesus, and then in virtue of their choice to love him, they became Christians? My suspicion is they weren't thinking about love at all. My suspicion is they were thinking about truth. However, that they came to the truth, whether it was a subjective conviction, like in my case, that, yeah, this stuff isn't really true, or whether there was an argument that impressed on them the truth of it, however they came to it, I don't think they were saying, okay, I'm going to choose to love you, God. No, I think that they were choosing to trust him. And the love that Christians have for Jesus and for God developed later. And if that's really the way it works out for most people, then I don't think it's sound to argue that God wanted us to love him freely. I don't think we do love him freely in that sense. No, we're not forced to love him like he's twisting our arms. It's those terms, forcing to love and loving freely, don't even belong in this conversation. Love happens, it grows, it develops, it's organic, it's coming from a different place. My conviction, that love comes from God. God puts the love in our hearts for our kids. God puts that's part of the natural part of parenting. That's built into the human condition, into human nature. And God, through a sovereign act of grace, helps us to turn. He softens our will. He re-inclines our will towards him. We come to him, trust in him, and then his Spirit works love for God over time as we grow with him. I don't think there are any decisions at all involved in the loving aspect of it.
Okay.
One last thing. If the decision has to be a free decision to love, and what we mean by a free decision to love is that it could have been different. We could choose for it or against it, and that's the basic condition, the could have done otherwise CDO condition of libertarian freedom. Then God doesn't love us, because God's love proceeds from his nature. His choice to elect us and save us might be maybe an act of choice, but his love for his creatures comes from his nature. He's not just deciding, I'm going to love these people today. I'll love humans today. And it's a real love because I could have chosen to hate them. What the heck? But I'm going to choose to love them. No, God's nature is good. He loves from his nature. He is love, John says. That is, it's an essential characteristic of God's nature to love. He has no choice about it. He does have a choice whether he's going to forgive, but we're talking about something a little different. So I do. This is for these reasons. I do not think this equation that is offered, that we need freedom to love God and God wants us to love him freely. I do not think that this equation is sound.
So what would be a better way of addressing the problem of evil then, if that doesn't work?
Well, I think the problem of evil is a function of moral freedom, not freedom to love. That is, God has given us and see, this is why I'm making this distinction. There are people who have characterized the problem of evil. Why is evil possible? Because God wanted us to love him, so he gave us the choice to love him. I don't think that's why we got choice. I don't think choice has anything to do with the love part of the equation, but I do think moral choice is significant. But for other reasons, the ability to make moral choices is important. To be morally free is an important part of being human, that we can choose good over evil. This does have this has to do with the nature of our souls and the growth, if you will, of our souls. So I do not think that condition will always prevail. when we're in heaven, we are going to be morally good like God is morally good. We're going to be good by nature. We will not be able to choose evil in heaven. We can only choose between evil and good here, and I think there is some soul-building function of that at this time. But I do not think it's related to love.
Okay. So just to summarize, make sure that I got this.
Okay.
A better way to put it would be we still have the ability to choose to follow him and to make other choices.
We have the ability to choose right and wrong. We could choose right. I mean, in general, ultimately, there is no choice to always be morally perfect because we're broken and we're going to make bad choices that flow from that brokenness. But we still have a measure of moral freedom. And we are to exercise that moral freedom properly. We exercise it as a fallen person consistently against God. God has to reincline our will and overcome the fall in our individual cases so that we then pursue him, and then we choose him, and our love for him grows, and then we battle the flesh the rest of our life, trying to choose the good rather than evil. But at the resurrection, we lose the flesh. Now we are new creatures completely. We have glorified bodies, no more struggle.
Okay.
All righty?
Cool.
All right, Andy.
Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure to talk with you, and very good questions. All righty?
Thank you.
You're welcome. I got to run to break right now quickly and be back with your questions after this. I'm Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason.
You can take STR with you through our apps for iPhone, Android, and iPad, available for free from iTunes or the Android market. You can listen live to STR's weekly webcast, to podcast archives by all of our STR speakers, check the STR blog, and access timely and practical resources on many subjects, including the latest Solid Ground, Greg's mentoring letters, and much, much more. You'll have STR resources at your fingertips in a clean layout with great features and functionality. It's free, so download the app today through iTunes or the Android market and start carrying STR with you everywhere you take your phone. Just one more way that STR is seeking to increase your knowledge, wisdom, and character.
All righty then. Greg Koukl here, back with you on Stand to Reason, giving you a piece of my mind. I like to call this thought radio because not only do I want to know what you think, but I want to tell you what I think. And what I hope to do is to help you to think better. That is not just think my thoughts after me, although, I guess I'd have to say that would be better, because if I didn't think my thoughts were good thoughts, I wouldn't be thinking them. Or maybe another way of putting it is, if I didn't believe my ideas were true, I wouldn't believe what I believe. I'd believe something else and believe that were true, But my goal is to help you to know how to think through these things. And I think this is a unique feature where we're not just dispensing information, though that is valuable, and many people and organizations do that. We need it. I'm trying to take it a step further and help you see how I work through these things. And it sometimes it's just by example and not so much by instruction. And that's because I think sometimes these capabilities are caught more than taught, if you will. In any event, that's my goal here. Thought Radio, Stand to Reason. Let's go to San Diego. Hello, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. How are you?
Good. I'm doing fine. How about you?
Good. So I got my dad listening on the other end.
Uh-huh.
He has the I guess the PDF copy of Tactics, or the Kindle version or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And I've got the hard copy. So we've both been reading it and discussing it. So I have kind of a broader question and then a specific example to give you.
Okay.
The broader question is, how do you get yourself to a point where you can start to use these tactics, And so my specific example, and that was my dad's question. He loves the book, he loves the tactics, but he said to me, I don't know when and how to use these in just casual conversation with people that I meet.
Okay. I make a distinction in the book, and actually I make these distinctions even more aggressively now since I've been teaching a lot since the book. So I think if I were writing it again, I'd make these things even a little bit more tight or more pointed, I guess is what I mean. And my goal is not to go the whole 9 yards with somebody. Even when I have a willing listener, I want to give them one or two things to chew on, and that's it. I'm not, okay. So I'm putting a stone in their shoe.
Stone in the shoe. Yep.
Okay, so there's that. And secondly, how do I do that? Well, I have a game plan. The game plan is the Columbo tactic. The other tactics are used in conjunction with the game plan, with the Columbo tactic, but the Columbo tactic is the tactic out of the gate. And when I teach it now, what I tell people is I am going to give you a game plan, even if it's a 45-minute talk. I am going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know or how aggressive the other person happens to be. All right? When I am done with that teaching 45 minutes later, they can start immediately in light of the game plan. So there is no ramp up for this. It isn't like you got to learn a bunch more things. If you know the first two Columbo questions, you can get going. The first question, what do you mean by that? And the second question, how did you come to that conclusion? Let me just focus on the first one, though, because this is how I get out of the gate. Remember that this is a question that is meant to accomplish a goal of gathering information. So, Dave, for you or for your pop, you are thinking, where do I go now? In any circumstance you find yourself, you want to begin to gather information. And then you use some version very broadly of the question, what do you mean by that? Sometimes it'll be precise, sometimes specific. Sometimes it will be very, very general. The Witch in Wisconsin, the opening illustration there of the Columbo chapter.
One that always sticks in my mind.
Yeah, well, see, there it is. Does that jewelry have religious significance for you? Okay, that's what do you mean by that? So that was out of nowhere, Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, the person that I want to talk to isn't wearing odd jewelry. Okay, well, that's
exactly right.
Okay. But see, this is just, there's going to be some other kind of thing. Broadly, I'd say just draw the other person out by asking questions that show an interest in the person and keeping alert for trying to draw them out in a way that will allow you to get a little bit of a topography, a kind of a mental topography, a picture in your mind of the lay of the land. It's the best way I can explain it. I'll tell you what happened to me Friday. So it was that 4 days ago, and I flew to Dallas, and sitting next to me was a gentleman who was a Jain, Jain. So how did I know he was Jainist? Jainism is a religion from India where they believe in reincarnation, and they really try to be careful about not killing anything. In fact, a lot of Jains wear masks, like a breathing mask, so they don't even breathe in microbes kind of thing. It's really, in a certain sense, a bit extreme.
Yeah.
So he had asked, he said, I said, hi. I always greet somebody in the airplane. Hi, how you doing? And then we'll see what happens. He said, are you going home or are you going to work? I said, I'm going to work. Where are you going? Well, I'm going to, and then I try to find a way to characterize what I'm about to do that might pique his curiosity. So I have a little advantage there because this is what I do for a living. No, I understand that, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes I go in a different direction. It's just the kind of question people sitting next to each other on an airplane ask to make small talk.
What do you do?
Well, now I'm talking a little bit about my Christian convictions, right? And I just turned to him and I said, "What about you?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, spiritually speaking, where are you coming from?" That's all I asked. What do you mean by that's kind of what do you mean by that? I'm gathering information.
Yeah.
And it was very relaxed, and so there was no tension. He said, "Oh, I'm Jane," and I said, "Really? Where's your face mask?" And he started laughing. He said, "So you know
sure
some."
He was probably impressed you knew what that was.
Right, but what if I didn't know anything about Jainism? What would I say next?
That's a funny name for a man.
Yeah, that's right. I'd say, yeah, that's right. I mean, he might have said Jainist. I don't know, but I
Sure.
would say, so what's a Jain? What's Jainism? What is that?
Right,
And then he
right.
would explain
Yeah,
it
what
to
do you
me.
mean by that?
Exactly, exactly. So as he went talking for a while, and now I was able to make some contributions because I knew something about it, and his idea that, well, if you kill things, then you get bad karma, and we got to be careful. He doesn't even eat any root vegetables like carrots, because if you pull a carrot up to harvest it, you might hurt an organism. And I said, isn't it kind of hard? To be a Jain, isn't it kind of hard not to kill stuff when you're thinking of killing on that level? He says, yeah, it is. I said, well, it sounds to me like you're always increasing your karmic debt. You're never getting rid of it. Now, that's another information question, clarification for me. Are you
Sure.
So things are getting worse for you, not better, right? Yeah, they are. And so, wow, does that bum you out? It's kind of what I was asking. So now I'm seeing what I think might be a little liability in his view. So I'm just in a very gentle way asking about it, not condemning. In fact, at that point, I said, "Gee, I don't mean to be critical here, but it seems to me that you're always, things are getting worse for you every day." And he chuckled and said, "Yeah." And then I said a little bit later in the conversation, "Why do you think Jainism is true?"
How did you come to that conclusion?
There you go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't know this guy. Got on the plane, sat down next to me. Okay, so that's an example of getting into a conversation by drawing a person out. Now, the same pattern you and your dad can use in any other circumstances. You can do the
May I
same
give you
kind of
an
thing.
Example?
Yeah, the barbershop probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I get my hair cut in a barbershop that is filled with hipsters and skaters and guys who love to drop the F-bomb every other word, both the guys cutting hair and the guys getting the haircuts.
Yeah.
And I've kind of given myself a personal challenge to, at some point when I'm there, bring up spiritual conviction. And it's a terrifying environment. And I'm just trying to kind of tool around in my head how I can interject into, this casual male, alpha male conversation that goes on there, and use my tactics.
Well, this is kind of like meeting a comedian and saying to the comedian, "All right, you're a comedian. Okay, say something funny." The liability for me is that there is a certain rhythm to these kinds of things, and things occur in the rhythm. And I'm just at the end of the hour. I want to hold you over to the next hour, and I'll just come right back after a couple of minutes here, and we'll just pick up where we left off. Is that all right with you?
That sounds good.
And if your line goes dead when I put you on hold, Tom, you put him on hold, all right? And then you call back if it goes dead. But I'll talk to you in just a few minutes, because this kind of a circumstance, and I'll think about it a little over the break, but for me, I'm kind of in the flow of things. I'm paying attention, listening, and just seeing what's happening. I'll tell you about what happened to me yesterday at the gas station pumping gas, and I'm just looking for an opportunity. I'm just tossing out a little bit here, a little bit there. And maybe this will pique your curiosity, Dave, and others, or maybe you'll be able to think of some things. I can't think of any like hair cutting illustrations at the moment, but it's not so much the hair cutting, it's just being around people and listening to what people say, and then trying to tee off of or springboard off of their conversation and their comments. So let me give some thought to this. I do want to tell you about what happened to me yesterday at a gas station, and maybe I'll give you another gas station illustration, and maybe you get the rhythm of this a little bit more. All right? So hang with me there, Dave. I'm Greg Koukl, Stand to Reason. That's the end of this hour. Please stay with me for another one.
Would you like brief, easily digestible answers to some of the challenges you face as a Christian ambassador? Well, that's why we created our Ambassador's Guide series of booklets. Each volume in this series is designed to equip you with the practical tools you need to understand a topic or area of concern confronting Christians today. With these booklets, you'll receive concise and approachable guides to various philosophies like pluralism and postmodernism, world religions such as Islam and Mormonism, even strategies on how to answer the challenges of the new atheists. To order a booklet from the Ambassador's Guide series, visit our online store at str.org or call 800-2-REASON.
All right, back to work here. Final hour on Stand to Reason. And I've done something here. Greg Koukl, your host, done something that I don't usually do, but needed to because of the nature of the conversation and the where the clocks were. And that is, I've kept somebody over from the prior hour. His name is Dave, and I'll go back to Dave. I'm going to be careful. Dave, there. Do I got you again?
I'm here, and it's actually funny because last time I called, this did happen. So I guess I'm the exception, not the rule.
Okay, well, I'm glad to keep you over though to be able to talk a little bit more about it.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and the question is, how do you employ the tactical approach and kind of get the ball rolling? And I guess I'll tell you some illustrations in just a second, but a big part of it, and I tell this to audiences, just start, just start. Just start asking people, drawing them out, talking to them. I mean, in an environment that you just described in the barbershop, there must be some opportunities where you can ask people what their own convictions are about things. And here's all these rowdy alpha males you mentioned in there that, clipping away and talking away. And so just ignore the F-bombs that you mentioned last time. Just kind of overlook that. Just let it go. It's just the way people are who don't, they're living out their own convictions and their own values. So we're not going to mess with that now. We're going to try to converse about these kinds of things. And so, and look for an opportunity, draw them out. Hey, it's Easter this weekend, right?
I was thinking that, yeah.
Anybody, we got any two church times a year people here? Who's going to Easter service?
Yeah.
Now if somebody says, well, I'm going, but I don't usually go to church other times. Really, why would you go Easter, not other times? I'm just curious. That's all. Not a challenge. And now we're rolling. See what he says. I'll tell you what happened yesterday, though. And there was actually two things happened. They were just back to back, and this is maybe a little bit of human interest. But I'm parked. I pull up in the Arco. I'm getting my gas, and somebody else has their car parked there. A young man, he comes up to me. He says, "Look, I'm flat out of gas. I just need a couple of bucks. I'm just empty. Can you please give me some gas?" And I turned him down. I just don't ever do that but every time I turn people down like that, because I don't think it's wise to do that, we give plenty to different enterprises and a lot more than a few bucks for gas, but places that we know that will actually help the poor. So, but even so, I always feel a little funny, like I know there's some lady gave him $5 and probably thinks she was wonderful and I was a jerk, okay. Well, then a woman pulled up and she was having trouble putting the money in the thing. It was one of those where you put bills in and,
ATM type thing.
That's right. And she wasn't pushing the buttons, and she was an older woman with a cane. And I said, well, hey, let me help you out. And so I walked her through the whole thing, got her money in, and she's ready to go on. And I said, let me pump the gas for you. And then her car was on the wrong side of the pump. So I kind of talked her around, and she did whatever. And she'd been driving since San Francisco, and she had a handicap sticker, and she couldn't move very well. And I pumped the gas. And I'm talking to her, and she's talking about the woes of traveling and this and that, and it's been a long day and whatever. And then I say, hey, look it's Resurrection Week, right? He's risen. That's all I said. And so that was my attempt to try to bring in something spiritual. Now, I was helping her out, and I got to tell you, it was no big deal. I enjoyed it. I wasn't being put out.
Just like you were talking about.
Exactly. I didn't want to bring it up as an illustration then because it might have looked like I was trying to toot my own horn, but it fits here. So here was just a little opportunity. Maybe cheer her up, maybe make a comment. Maybe she would have said, well, I don't believe that kind of stuff. And I would say, why not?
Right.
And then, well, what would you say next? I don't know. It depends on what she says. But I'm just looking for an opportunity to toss a little bait out there, and see if somebody bites. And if she didn't bite at all, which she really didn't, but at least I said something kind of, oh, he's being nice to me. That makes me feel better kind of thing. And so that's plenty good. Right. Once in that in that same station, I was right next to another car that had a coexist sticker on it. You've seen those, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I asked, what does that sticker mean? Of course, I knew what it meant. I mean, but I wanted them to explain it. We should all get along kind of thing. Well, then I asked, do you think that religions in this country don't get along? Now, of course they do.
Hmm.
Well, then we all coexist fine. Well, then why would you have a coexist sticker around here? And I know it. I don't remember how the conversation went, but that was just getting into it, right? I'm gonna do it again. I've seen it a lot on the highway, but next time I see it at a gas station, I'll do the same thing again. Because one point that I want to make is, if that person says, well, there's some people think their religious view is right and everybody else is wrong, and that's not good. Oh, okay, so you think their view is mistaken, right? And what view do you think is the right view? Oh, that all religions are equally right. So you think their religious view is wrong and your religious view is right. How is that different from what you just said you're concerned about? So now there's a situation where, and you might recall this from the Tactics book, I have worked this out in my mind in advance, the series of questions I'd ask if this comes up, so I'm ready to do it. I'm right there.
Sure.
I'm relaxed. I'm not uptight. I'm just curious. Help me out here. And then we'll see what they say. So I didn't think of anything clever for a barbershop, but I don't think the barbershop part is the part that really matters. It's just that you're hanging
Right.
out there with a bunch of people that are saying wild things, and
Yeah, and it's also kind of a lion's den feel. You're surrounded by people that you assume based on their behavior that they are all going to have views opposite of you. Pretty daunting.
Okay. Well, you're probably right about that, but why would it be? Tell me what's daunting about their views being opposite yours. Now, just think for a moment now about your Columbo tactic. What do you mean by that, and how'd you come to that conclusion? If you are there, if you're in student mode, all right,
Mhm.
which is where I suggest beginners go,
Hmm.
be a student. Just figure first couple weeks, I'll just ask the first question. Maybe next couple weeks, I'll go to the second question. But in either case, you're in fact-finding student mode.
Hmm.
What's the worst that could happen if you are just drawing people out for their point of view? If that's the only thing you're going to do to get rolling.
That's true.
If they're daunting, it means they got crazy ideas, which means you're probably going to get a lot of lively feedback. But if you're not putting yourself on the line, well, I disagree. Here's what I think contrary to you. If you're not doing that, you're not going to get in trouble.
Well, I'm thinking back to your example in the Tactics book of the professor who says, I see you're one of those Bible believers.
Yeah, that's true. Right. The professor's ploy.
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, yeah. Well, then you have a choice to make. I don't know if they would say that in that situation. Remember that in my professor's ploy illustration, the professor was attacking Christianity, and the questions were regarding the attack. So he
Right.
might presume, oh, well, you must be one of those Christians who are, sandbagging here, and
Sure.
and then he calls you out. But if you're just, I don't know if your coworkers there in the barbershop know that you're a follower of Christ or not. But even if they do, and you're asking questions, they say, well, you must be this and that. I said, well, yes, but that's not what I'm talking about now. I'm trying to figure out your views. That's all. So you're still cool, calm, collected. You're not in attack mode, and you're just you can convey that to them if they might feel a little defensive. I'm just trying to figure out what other people actually think.
Yeah.
That's all. I'm trying to get a sense of things here. And so you can just stay very, very low key. Now, if somebody gets a little aggressive, it would actually surprise me if you're doing the things the way I just suggested. It would surprise me that somebody got aggressive with you, but they might. You just roll with the punches. You don't have to push back. But sometimes you get knocked down. Well, that's all right. That's just part of the process.
Sure.
After you get knocked down a couple times, you know what you think? That didn't hurt as much as I thought it would hurt. That happens. And so you think, oh,
Yeah.
it emboldens you a little bit more. I just made a new friend over the weekend when I was in Dallas, and he was a infantry officer in the infantry in Afghanistan. And he said, so we were talking about, this guy's seen a lot of action, he had a platoon that was very effective in suppressing the bad guys. And so we talked quite a bit about that because I have a military interest and a military background a bit myself, and I've been doing a lot of study about battles and this and that. And so I asked him about what happens when you begin to take fire. You get in a firefight. He said, well, when the bullets are zipping by your head, right at first, your adrenaline goes right through the roof. Your first response is fear. Boom, adrenaline. He said, but after a few minutes, that gets under control, and you're still adrenalized and you're alert, but you calm down on your nerves and you do your job. And so there is a sense in which, I guess there's a parallel here. When you're facing a firefight, at first it's going to feel like, oh my gosh. And then, you collect your wits a little bit, and you take a deep breath, you walk through it, and then it's not as bad as you thought.
Sure.
And you get a little used to it, and then you begin to move. Just keep your sense of humor, and just start out. And this is for you and your pop and everybody else who's listening. How do I get into play? You start out in fact-finding mode. Don't worry about anything else. Just go out and gather information. And I think you're going to find out when you start doing this, it is not as scary and difficult as you thought it would be.
Appreciate that.
Even with a bunch of alpha males cutting hair. All right. It's good talking to you, Dave. My best to your pop as well,
Thanks
okay?
very much, Greg. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Give me a call in a couple months and tell me how things are going, all right?
I will.
All
Thanks.
right. I'd like to hear from you. All right. Before I get to another caller, there's something that I've been waiting to say, but I've had these great callers just lining up like crazy, and I haven't had an opportunity to talk about this. But this is Passion Week after all. Friday is Good Friday. Sunday, where many of you are listening right now through tape delay, is going to be Easter Sunday. And I want to say something about Easter. And I want to say something about the rationale for believing that Jesus actually got out of the grave. I want to talk about why the tomb was empty. And this is part of what I talked about last weekend in Dallas. And as I talked about two miracles, the miracle of the cross and the miracle of the resurrection. The first miracle no one could see because that was a trade that Jesus made with the Father, our guilt for his righteousness, justification, substitutionary atonement. But the miracle that happened on Sunday was a miracle that many people did see. They saw the risen Christ, and millions upon millions have experienced, many of you who are listening to the sound of my voice. But some of you have not and wonder about this claim that he is risen. And I'll tell you very briefly what I told the audience at Watermark Church on Sunday morning about the resurrection. And I just realized that if you have the Stand to Reason app, you can go to our resources in the STR app. And under go to resources and then solid ground, there is a couple of years worth of solid grounds available, and one of them is two miracles, which is the solid ground that I wrote that reflects the content largely of the talk I gave Sunday and has the information I'm about to give you in it. So if you don't have the STR app, go to the App Store, get the app for free, download it, punch resources, punch solid ground, look up two miracles, and there it's going to be for you. But let me briefly offer you this foundational approach, and that is with regards to what happened on that Sunday morning. There has been an academic change of mind over the last 50 years, a dramatic reversal of scholarship regarding the resurrection accounts, such that on the balance, scholars of all stripes agree to four facts of history pertaining to Easter, the original Easter weekend, that Sunday morning and the Friday before it. And the facts are these, that Jesus was crucified and died on a Roman cross, placed in a tomb, which tomb was empty. That's number two. He was dead. Tomb was empty. And third, the disciples of Jesus of Nazareth had an experience that they thought was Jesus of Nazareth risen from the dead. So there's three E's there. I think this is the way Lee Strobel does it. Execution, empty tomb, and experience, all right? And then the fourth point is that it was this experience that was the impetus for starting the early church. That was the initiation of the church. Now, the simple question is, given those 4 facts agreed on by the majority of scholars pertaining to the historical details, what best explains those facts? And there's only a handful of possibilities. Here's one, and I'm just giving you, I'm not making these up, I'm giving you the ones that people have given down through history as ways of explaining away the resurrection. I'm giving them quickly because I want to get to as many callers as I can in this final hour. One was that Jesus never died. I mean, he looked like he died. He just swooned. He fainted and was revived in the tomb. Okay, so Jesus was crucified, pinned to a cross, nails in his hands and feet, hung naked there all afternoon in the cold April air, run through his chest with a spear. Roman soldiers, well acquainted with death, pronounced him dead. They wrapped him up in 100 pounds of spices, put him in a cold tomb, laying on cold rock, and 3 days later he felt better and walked out and convinced his disciples that he was the risen Christ. Is that right? I don't think so. And if you want to believe that, okay, you're welcome to it. But it seems to me those who believe that are too easily satisfied. All right, how about somebody stole the body? Okay, who? There's only 3 possible groups: Romans, Jews, disciples. The Romans wanted Jesus dead. They're not going to steal the body and make it look like he rose. The Jews wanted Jesus dead. They're not going to steal the body and make it look like he rose. The disciples, they didn't want Jesus dead, but why would they steal the body? Well, to make it look like he rose. Okay. If it looks like he rose, then they proclaim the resurrected Christ contrary to fact, and they know it's contrary to fact. In other words, they're lying. Why would they do that? Oh, that's so they could all be famous. How did they know they were going to be famous? And by the way, why would somebody want to endure what they endure just on the hope of someday being famous? Here's the basic rule regarding lying, and every kid knows this, right? If you make up a lie, don't invent a story that gets you tortured and killed. No duh. How about this one? They went to the wrong tomb. I guess it's possible. The disciples, Mary, the women, all went to the wrong tomb. He's risen, he's risen, he's risen. How do you fix that? You say, excuse me, disciples, women, he's not risen. He's in this tomb, not that tomb. There he is, he's lying there, and he stinks. Okay, so that would be easily resolved, all right? Maybe a hallucination. Well, first of all, the hallucination is meant to explain the appearances that the disciples thought they saw. It does not explain the empty tomb. You still got to ask yourself, where's the body? Secondly, group hallucination? You know what a hallucination is, right? It's when something happens in your head that isn't out there. So how does everybody have the same hallucination happening in their head? A hallucination is like a dream. Can you have the same dream as somebody else at the same time? Honey, I just woke up and had a fabulous dream. Hold my hand. Let's both fall asleep again, and we'll share it together. It doesn't work that way. How do you produce exactly the same detailed dream in the minds of a dozen people at exactly the same time, many times over, in many different settings? Do you see that this is not plausible? By the way, do you know the difference between a dream and reality? I do, and I suspect the disciples did too. Of course, there's then the Dave theory. You remember that movie Dave with Kevin Kline, where Dave looked just like the president of the United States, and when the president had a stroke and was in a coma, they grabbed Dave and made him stand in for the president, and nobody knew because they looked almost exactly alike. Well, that's what one person at least has argued, that Jesus had an identical twin and walked into Jerusalem on Easter Sunday, found out what was going on. They had been separated at birth, by the way, and then walked in and saw an opportunity and presented himself to the disciples as the risen Christ. Of course, this doesn't explain why the tomb is empty or anything like that, but this is what one person has advanced, philosopher Greg Koukl. Well, my 9-year-old Annabeth had, I think, the best critique of that view when I shared the view with her. She said, "That's dumb." And on that, I agree. Listen, what would transform a group of shivering, shaking men who had scattered, who had abandoned Jesus, who had denied they even knew him, hiding from authorities, doors locked, lights out, into vibrant witnesses for Jesus, standing in the face of the authorities who threatened to flog them? What would cause Saul of Tarsus? A man so dedicated to his religion that he rounded up men and women to have them beaten and executed because they proclaimed Christ, and then turned on a dime to take his place with those who he previously persecuted on Christ's behalf, eventually giving his own life. What explains that? It seems to me, given all these facts, only one answer will actually do. In Peter's words, this Jesus, God raised up again, to which we all are witnesses. The smart money is on the resurrection, to put it simply. At least that's the way I see it. All right, let's run to break, and I'll come back and take the rest of your calls here on Stand to Reason.